I first saw Ethan at the gym. I was 64 years old and had been married for nearly 40 years to a guy who was no longer my love partner, my hubby. Thomas was a nice guy in many respects, but our marriage had devolved into a state of polite indifference. We were like two parallel lines that never connected. That day at the gym, I recall Ethan moving with easy grace, his young exuberance a stark contrast to my own tiredness. Ethan was 23, youthful and energetic, and his presence seemed almost magnetic. His eyes were intense, like a fire that couldn't be ignored. I found myself pulled to him in a manner I hadn't felt in years. I'd find myself looking at him from across the room, feeling both excited and guilty. It was incorrect, but also exhilarating. I was trying to get his attention. The first time I approached him, it was informal. Just a remark about how effectively he lifted weights. But it was how I phrased it. The soft touch on his arm intended to indicate more than just friendship. Ethan was cordial, smiling as he spoke. But there was a spark in his eyes that I read as curiosity, or maybe intrigue. Over the following few weeks, I got more deliberate. I'd change into training clothing that highlighted my body while being subtle enough to be provocative. I'd often find excuses to be near him, initiating up discussions and softly stroking his arm or shoulder throughout our interactions. I'd observe his response carefully, noting how he'd tense or attempt to keep his cool. It was a game that I was both eager and nervous about, regardless of my attempts. Ethan was elusive. He was always pleasant, engaging, and never over the line. He'd laugh at my jokes, but there was a distinct gap that kept me wondering. His comments were cautious, never encouraging, but not dismissive. It was as if he was playing a game of restraint, and the more he held back, the more I wanted to push the limits. I'd find myself fantasizing about him, creating situations in which he'd eventually give in. I began to want our meetings, looking forward to seeing him at the gym and longing for that short but intense engagement. Every day my anticipation rose, increasing my need. One day, after an intensive exercise, I decided to try a new method. I'd just completed my practice and was wiping away perspiration when Ethan approached. I was dressed in a form-fitting tank top and shorts, and the material clung to me in a manner that I hoped would capture his attention. I could see him staring at me as he approached, a sneer on his lips. "Hey, Ethan." I tried to act casual, but I could sense the tension between us. "And you've been working hard. What about a smoothie?" After this, he stared at me with the same inscrutable face, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. "That sounds wonderful," he answered with a firm voice. We headed to the smoothie bar together, and the discussion was light, with the normal banter. But I sensed a change. His reactions were sharper, and his tone had shifted somewhat. I decided to test the waters more. As we stood close together, I let my hand to brush across his, lingering for a second longer than required. He did not move away, but his eyes remained locked on the counter, his face a mask of concentration. The big breakthrough happened a few days later. I had asked Ethan to my place for supper with the intention of getting to know him better. Thomas was gone on one of his many business travels, leaving me alone to organize an evening that I thought would be both memorable and insightful. I spent hours cooking the dinner and dressed in a delicate, exquisite clothing that would accentuate my contours. When Ethan came, he seemed astonished but happy. We sat down to a delicious supper, and the air was filled with warmth and a hint of something more. The talk went effortlessly, but I noted how often Ethan's attention would fall on me, lingering on my clothing and how it emphasized my shape. After supper, we went to the living room. I had set it up to be warm and personal, with soft lighting and comfy chairs. I poured us 2 glasses of wine, and we sat on the sofa. I could feel the tension rising between us, a tangible electricity crackling with each contact. As the evening went on, I felt myself moving closer to Ethan. Our chat got more intimate, more passionate, and I could feel his inhibition slipping. His fingers brushed across mine as he grabbed for his wine glasses, which I interpreted as a message. I leaned forward gently, letting my shoulder contact his. I could feel his breathing speed, and I knew he was experiencing the same electric charge that I was. I let my hand rest softly on his thigh, my fingertips stroking the fabric of his pants. Ethan's breathing became more labored, and he stared at me with a mixture of want and uncertainty. Finally, I decided to take the leap. So I turned to him, locked my gaze on his, and gradually leaned forward. Our lips met in a kiss that was both sweet and urgent. It felt as if all of my pent-up desire and expectation had been funneled into that one kiss. Ethan replied as enthusiastically, his hands encircling my face as he intensified the kiss. When we eventually drew apart, we were both breathless. Ethan had a satisfied expression in his eyes. It was evident that he was as eager as I was to discover what was going on between us. I could feel his resistance fading, replaced by a strong need that mirrored mine. The ensuing weeks were a blur of passion and secrecy. Each meeting with Ethan was exciting and dangerous. We continued to meet in my place, each time developing a ranger sense of closeness and connection. The physical contact increased in frequency and intensity. We'd exchange lengthy kisses, touch each other more boldly, and find ways to be alone whenever possible. Our interactions at the gym took on a new dimension, with each touch and look carrying significance and serving as a reminder of the secret we were holding. The thrill of our romance was intoxicating, and the fact that it was secret from Thomas just heightened the intensity. Ethan performed his role enthusiastically. His young exuberance contrasted with my more seasoned approach. He had the ideal blend of excitement and restraint, and it drove me crazy. Ethan had a fantastic night at my place. We'd spent the evening eating and chatting, and our discussion had become more personal. After supper, we walked to the living area, where the atmosphere was casual and the lighting was mellow. Ethan's fingers brushed across mine, and a familiar pleasure passed through me. We sat close on the sofa, nearly touching. I could feel his eagerness as he waited for me to make the next step. I gently traced his arm with my fingertips, relishing how his muscles stiffened beneath my touch. As the night progressed, our kisses became more intense. I drew him closer, our bodies crushed together, and we explored one another with a combination of eagerness and care. We ended up in my bedroom, where the closeness was at its pinnacle. The physical connection was exciting, and each touch seemed to strengthen our closeness. Despite our strong connection, the romance was not without challenges. There were occasions when I felt guilty and questioned the morality of what we were doing. But such times were short, overshadowed by the strong feelings Ethan elicited in me. The secrecy surrounding our connection exacerbated the stress. I had to be always watchful to ensure that Thomas never suspected anything. There were evenings when I would lay awake, my mind racing with memories of Ethan and the exhilarating, risky affair in which we were immersed. I also observed Jockey getting more creepy and confident in his Cyrus. He would often tease me with mischievous touches and words, bringing me to the brink. It was evident that he liked the power he had over me, which added an intriguing aspect to our connection. Ethan came over one evening after having a particularly stressful day at the gym. He was disturbed, his customary calm replaced by a feeling of urgency. We instantly plunged into one another's arms, kissing fiercely and desperately. The strain had clearly reached a breaking point, and the release felt both exciting and overpowering. Our bodies moved with fury, matching the intensity of our feelings. The intensity we had was both physical and emotional, the result of weeks of covert encounters that had fueled our need and expectation. Afterward, we lay together in a room filled with the soothing sounds of our breathing. Ethan glanced at me with a combination of pleasure and need. "I never thought it could be like this," he added gently. I grinned with a full heart. Neither did I, but it's been fantastic. The affair continued. I became more conflicted between the exhilaration of my connection with Ethan and the reality of my marriage. Thomas was completely unaware of my hidden existence, and I battled with the mixed feelings that come with having two lives. Each rendezvous with Ethan was a frenzy of passion and discovery, but the guilt of misleading Thomas hung heavy on me. Our encounters grew increasingly regular, each with the same passion that had first brought us together. We would sneak moments of closeness wherever we could, sometimes in my place, sometimes in remote locations that provided us with a momentary escape from the outside world. The excitement of our secret romance never faded, and Ethan's young enthusiasm contrasted dramatically with the monotonous monotony of my married existence. Ethan's aggressiveness increased, as did his emotional engagement. He was no longer simply the eager lover he was becoming, but someone I really cared about. Our chats became more deep, addressing aspirations, concerns, and the intricacies of our lives. He began to ponder the future, asking me what I wanted not just in our relationship but in my life. Overall, these interactions were both exciting and worrisome. Ethan's probing questioning caused me to focus on my choices and the life I was leading. One evening, after a very intense talk, Ethan grabbed my hand and escorted me to a quiet, isolated area in the yard. The lovely moonlight cast a soothing glow over us, and I felt a deep feeling of connectedness. As we stood together, the emotional depth of our connection became more apparent, and the distinction between physical desire and real attachment blurred. Ethan's fingertips followed the contours of my face as he looked at me with a mixture of adoration and worry. "What are we doing?" "Eleanor," he asked quietly. "I know this is serious, and I understand how much it matters to you. But where does this go? What do you want?" His question struck me hard. I had been so caught up in the thrill and secrecy of our affair that I had failed to consider the long-term consequences. I felt a surge of vulnerability as I realized Ethan was no longer simply a passing diversion, but had become an important part of my life. "I do not know," I confessed, my voice quivering slightly. I never anticipated it would reach this stage. I was simply searching for something unique, something that would make me feel alive again. But now I need to consider what this implies for both of us. As the days passed, I became more obsessed with the repercussions of our romance. Ethan's question lingered in my head, and I realized I needed to face the truth of my predicament. Thomas's return from his work trip heightened my anxiousness. I had to keep the appearance of a happy wife while I was tormented by my hidden existence. One night, Thomas arrived home earlier than planned. I was having a furious phone chat with Ethan when Thomas strolled in. I hastily disconnected the call. My heart is racing as I confronted him. Thomas glanced at me curiously, sensed something was wrong but unable to define what it was. "Everything all right?" he inquired, his voice laced with anxiety. I faked a grin to look indifferent. "Yes, I had a long day. I was conversing with a buddy." Thomas seemed happy with my response, but I could detect a flash of uncertainty in his eyes. As I watched him go about his nighttime ritual, I felt guilty and confused. My life with Thomas was stable and predictable, but it also included unmet goals and unsaid regrets. Ethan had created a tornado of passion in my life, but at what cost? Ethan and I continued to see one another, but the emotional toll of our affair grew more difficult to endure. The thrill of secrecy and the delight of our meetings were tempered by the increasing sense that we needed to discuss our relationship's future. We had come to a crossroads where we had to decide whether to continue living in this condition of mental upheaval or face the truth of our predicament. We met one day at a remote park, which is a favorite of ours due to its calm and solitude. Ethan was abnormally silent. As we sat on a seat, his hand grabbed mine. I could detect his serious mood, which reflected my own anguish. "Eleanor," he started to sound serious. "I've been thinking a lot about us, what we want, and what that implies. I care strongly about you, but I can't go on like this. It is ripping me apart, and I know it is also harming you." I stared at him and felt the weight of his words. "I understand," I responded gently. "I've been thinking about it too. I never dreamed things would become this complex. I feel deeply about you, but I also live a life that is difficult to leave." Ethan took a long breath and looked into my eyes. "I want to be with you, Eleanor. I want us to have a future together, but we must find out how to make that happen. It isn't fair to either of us to continue living in this limbo." The choice wasn't simple. I needed to face the realities of my marriage and make a decision about my future. Thomas was a fine guy, but our marriage had long since lost its spark. Ethan gave a fresh start, an opportunity to regain passion and connection. But leaving Thomas was not something I could take lightly. following many long nights and passionate chats with Ethan. I took the agonizing choice to leave my marriage. It was a tough and emotional procedure marked by periods of uncertainty and remorse. Thomas was distraught, but he knew that our marriage had come to an end. Ethan and I launched a new chapter in our relationship, one founded on honesty and shared experiences. The change was difficult, but we managed it together. The affair, which began as a hidden pleasure, became the foundation for a new beginning, one full of promise and uncertainty. In the end, our relationship demonstrated the strength of emotion and the intricacy of human bonds. It was a voyage of self-discovery and growth that included both joy and suffering. As we progressed, we accepted the lessons learnt and the love we had discovered in one another.